you have the collapse, and then everybody starts shouting for leadership. And what do? You get another Hitler. The people who will absolutely be put into starvation by the collapse in the currency. They're going to have to vote for someone. They will. They will. They will elect what follows, and they will be angry.
They're going to get it approved by the government. Then they're going to move everybody's retirement assets into Bitcoin. They'll cause a blow off top. These people will get out of there with bazillions of dollars. And then the average American will be brought to their knees and they won't be able to eat anymore. And at that point, yes, don't worry, we've got this all covered. We're sending EBT cards to everybody, and we've expanded it so that you can buy a television set at Walmart if you want to. And that's it. And that's how we all got on CBDC, and the rest is history. Our grandchildren are a number and not a name.
An announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning.
We're having what's known as a crack-up-boom. It's a real pleasure to have you here. I've been reading you for so long, I can't even tell you.
Oh,
Alasdair, just tell me, how would you like me to introduce you? Because in my mind, you're the go-to man for contrasting geopolitics and economics. You know my background, so for a long time, I just looked at what was there, and I wasn't looking at a lot of the stuff behind the scenes.
yeah.
Tell me how I should introduce you, or how would you introduce yourself?
Well, basically, I mean, I'm now running my own Substack, which is McLeod Finance Substack,
Uh-huh.
and what I'm trying to do is to bring to a wider audience than I could possibly have at Gold Money an understanding of the difference between money and credit, and why this really matters, because credit is going down the pan, and if you're in credit, the credit bubble is about to burst, and I think this is the message which I really want to get over. So I suppose, I mean, what do I do? I've been a broker. I've been in the securities industry. I've been in banking, and now I'm sort of basically economics. I suppose I've been doing that for the last 25 years or thereabouts.
Okay. I never would have been able to predict that my career would take this trajectory. I may sound overstated when I say this, but I think you and I are watching the most important story that has ever played out in the history of humanity. And people would say, wow, that's a heck of a statement. And I'm like, but I'll just give you a backstory real quick.
Hmm,
In
please do.
2004, I was covering the war in Iraq, and a lot of it is downtime over there. So I stopped at a bookstore to pick up several books, and one of them was James Turk's book, The Coming Collapse of the Dollar and How to Profit from It. And I
Yeah.
didn't pick it up with a serious intention. I picked it up thinking it won't be boring. Let's see what this is. And as I got into it, I realized he was right. And
Yeah.
then that started a reading frenzy, and I've probably read 200 books on the subject since then. Keep in mind that's 20 years ago. Um,
Yeah.
but in the after that, I was sure about it pretty much from the start. By 2009, I was absolutely convinced. And to be honest, I did not think it would take as long as it has for things to get
Mm,
critical. I
mm.
honestly thought around 2009, I believed that we'd be already going through the grinder by 2016.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of my friends think I'm a nut. I mean, I've had a lot of friends. Like I had
Me
a lot of
too.
respect, and they all think I'm crazy. And I'm like, I'm not crazy. The numbers don't add up.
Yeah.
To tell me what you think of the last 20 years, and if you think this is basically, if you think it's the most important story.
It is, without a doubt, it is the most important story. And I mean, it's interesting because we've had a series of credit bubbles from the 1980s onwards, but none of them have been allowed to sort of wash out all the malinvestments, the zombies, all those things which really hamper an economy from its productive potential. And the way in which they've been stopped is the Fed just crashes interest rates to the point where the zombies say, Whew, thank goodness for that. We're still alive.
Yeah,
you know, and then they go into the next bubble. And of course, and then we had Greenspan saying, well, the most important thing, of course, is to keep the stock markets up because that creates a wealth effect. So, the bubble just went on and on. And now it is absolutely enormous and it's going to crash. They always crash
yeah,
eventually. So, as to your point about thinking that this is, gone on a lot longer than you thought it might, yeah, but it's very easy to underestimate the ability of the authorities to put off the inevitable, and that's what's been happening, and it's been happening really, I suppose, ever since the Second World War.
yeah. And this has made me rethink everything that I know about history or think I know. Because then I go back, I'll briefly visit this with you. Um, I go back to World War II in my head and I think about the stories that were told and I think about, all the horrible things that happened. And then I get back to the beginning of it and I go back to the beginning of the Fed and I go back to all the conspiracy theories, supposedly, which may or may not be conspiracy theories now,
Yeah,
I'm not sure. But when I think about World War II, I always go back to Operation Overlord. And I think about that and it sticks with me, that name. And I
mm,
think about what kind of bargain did Hitler make? What exactly went on in banking spheres? And I've got a question for you along these lines. A couple weeks ago, I saw a documentary that was talking about how Himmler had held a meeting in 1944. This is after the Allies landed, and he was telling his top SS commanders that they needed to ferret money out of the bank of the Dresdener Bank to
yeah,
any country in South America. And then, of course, the bombing of Dresden happened a few months later. And for my entire, just to give you backstory, my father's second wife is the daughter of an SS commander. They were from
right,
Dresden. So
okay,
my entire life, I heard that version of the story. And now I'm looking at it going, there was a reason for it.
mm,
I mean, prior to that, I thought it was just vindictiveness, things like
yeah,
that. They were trying to stop the flow of money. Do
yeah.
you think that's the case?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can't know for certain, but it's certainly likely, because I mean, you just see what's been happening recently. It's the same organizations. It's MI6, CIA, whatever. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, working off the same you know manual, really. So,
Right. And this
uh,
leads us up to where we are right now.
mm,
Because of these things, I'm looking at literally every single thing that happens with a really discerning eye. I
yeah,
mean, the, the, nobody wants to talk about the elephant in the room. And part of the reason I started this broadcast or this podcast, whatever we'll call it, is to bring these things up because, like I said, I've already got friends who think I'm insane. So I may as well go with that and keep talking about the things that don't make sense to me. COVID's an obvious one, but I don't want to start there. I think it's too obvious.
yeah,
We're going forward with all of these things that appear to be false flags. And in the last week, we've seen 1,001 UFOs and flying copters and all kinds of nonsense. And I'm like,
yeah.
did none of these people recall that Krugman talked about faking an alien invasion a decade ago? Does nobody remember this stuff?
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, I
It,
mean, the trouble is, you just cannot tell fact from fiction, and
that's
that's
the point.
actually why nobody bothers reading mainstream media anymore.
Right. And they
you know,
don't, but this is the thing that kills me is I'm sitting here talking freely with you about World War II, but I wouldn't do that with most people because they'd say, "Where's Dresden?" And I can't deal with that. It just makes my head want to implode. I mean, when you were talking about previous iterations of a crash like this,
mm,
again, I've got a lot of background with as far as German history goes, and I think about the Weimar Republic. And
yeah,
one of the things, so in my opinion, and bear in mind this is just my opinion, what they've done is they've blown up the world debt, and I don't know the number, and I'm pretty sure you probably don't either, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Is so big now that
mm,
when this crash starts getting teeth, it's going to be, I would say, at least 1,000 times bigger than the Weimar collapse. And if
yeah,
that's the case, That begs the question, after their funny money, the CBDC and all these digital things they have in mind, when that stuff finally collapses, what will be the going rate for gold and silver?
Yeah. Well,
What do you think?
exactly. I mean, your point about the sort of debt being so much bigger. Of course, the other side of debt is credit, which is why it's a credit bubble, if you like. And the real danger in this now is that governments for the major economies. I mean, we're looking at the US, we're looking at Japan, we're looking at the UK, we're looking at France, we're looking at Italy, we're looking at Spain. I mean, all the G7 members, with the possible exception of Germany and Canada, have debt to GDPs of over 100%. And
Right,
so, that's where the destructive bubble is. Because now that the global economy is definitely slowing, and I would argue that if President Trump brings in tariffs, this is going to make the situation even worse.
right,
Then all these countries are in debt traps, and what that basically means is that interest rates rise and rise and rise until the system breaks, and
right.
that's what's going to happen. And I mean, we've seen, today. I mean, I'm just looking at the UK's 30-year Treasury gilt bond. I mean, it's risen from December the 3rd. It's risen from under 4.75% to 5.2%. You
Wow.
know, sterling is now looking like it's really tanking. And you've got the same story in America. I mean, the FOMC statement, Powell bit, all the rest of it, trying to sort of slow down. He's walking a tightrope. I mean, he really is, because he doesn't want to kill the equity bubble, as it were, trigger off a slide there.
Right,
But he can now see that, particularly with Trump's intended tariffs, he can now see that actually he should be putting up interest rates, not lowering them. But he can't say that because he'd crash the whole system. So
right,
he's walking a tightrope on this one. But what he said was enough actually to trigger a crisis in other currencies. If
right,
you look at the euro, I mean that's looking like toast. Sterling equally. I mean sterling is really bad. I mean we got the double whammy of not only Trump pushing up the inflation thing in the world's largest economy, but we've got a far left government which is just trying to destroy the fabric of society. I mean they're going full Lenin, really.
right.
This
Do
is
you think
just
that one of the things I didn't, I'll give you a little more background. So my father worked as an attaché at the embassy in Moscow when I was little, and
oh,
yeah, so my background is all over the place. So but I've been fortunate enough to see an awful lot of different ways of doing things.
mm,
And I don't understand how anybody right now could be supporting these kinds of moves if they had studied what happened in the Soviet Union. But
yeah,
clearly they haven't. And it's very difficult because I, I lean towards this being a conspiracy. And that's just the way it is at this point. And if it is, that means that this plan has been out there for quite a while, and it's very, very involved to the point that
mm,
I think military grade AI is planning it. And I don't want, again, this is why people think I'm losing my mind, because I look at this and I think, how in the world did they get people in there that would support all this leftist stuff? And the only thing I can think, if I flip it around, I was just talking with my producer about this. Uh, if an argument could be made that during all of those years of different communist countries, that the U.S. and other Western powers were putting so much pressure on these countries that it made communism fail. I'd be willing to entertain that conversation. But in
mm,
truth, in practice, what we're seeing right now, it's compounding the problem. It's going to
yeah,
make things so much worse when it happens, because
yeah,
everybody's talking about how to divide the pie. And what I'm saying is there isn't going to be any pie. Nobody's getting anything.
no,
Does
that's
that
right.
sound overstated to you?
No, I don't think it is overstated. And you know, the whole of the if you like, the geopolitical thing is crazy, completely crazy. I mean, I was listening to an interview which Tucker Carlson had with Jeffrey Sachs, and I mean, it's a long interview, like it's sort of an hour and a half or more. But you listen to what Jeffrey Sachs says, and this is a man who is no fool. I mean, he's a professor of, was it Columbia University or, one of those anyway. Top guy, well connected, knows most of the players on, at the top of the geopolitical tree, and knows quite a lot of sort of intelligence agents and all the rest. I mean, this is a well-informed guy, and
Uh-huh.
he's saying the whole thing is just sort of on remote control. As to your point, I mean, he says that the deep state basically is staff full of. He didn't use the word idiots, but unintelligent people.
Useful idiot.
Well, the problem is that, of course, this is a sort of what's the term? It's groupthink at its very, very worst. They have convinced themselves that Russia is an enemy and we need to take it down. They are challenging America, her position, if you like, as the most important controlling nation in the world.
Right.
And America will brook no competition in this at all.
Okay, so this is part of the problem as well, because growing up as an American, I had a pretty high opinion of us. And now I look at this and I'm ashamed to be attached to it. And I actually, I won't get into all of it, but essentially, it's hard to put this in words. I'll put it this way. My enemy's enemy is my friend, and I'm talking about Putin. And I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say here, but anybody who stands up to the Western banking cabal is a friend of mine. That's really what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, he's pointed out some of our weaknesses, like our theft of Russia's property, like their reserves and so on. I'm not quite. I don't think I'm entirely with you on the banking thing.
Okay.
Because I think there's so much misunderstanding about banks. Now, having said that, the point about a cycle is that it is actually a cycle of bank lending. I mean, if you go all the way back to really the beginning of the 19th century in the UK, I mean, you could see the cycle every 10 years, you have a boom and a bust. And that is a cycle of bank lending. And it's a very human thing. But where we go wrong is we think, well, we can, save everybody from, from this sort of cycle. Yeah. This is the Keynesian thing.
Right.
The government can create credit to support the economy by lowering interest rates and running a budget deficit and all this sort of stuff.
Right.
But actually, when you start interfering in the economy, you basically screw it up. And this was well understood by American presidents, certainly up until the post First World War recession slump. There was a big slump, sort of second half of 1920 into 21. And I can't remember who the president at the time was, but basically, the attitude was hands off, just, in fact, push up interest rates and just, wipe the slate clean.
Right.
And the result was that, okay, it was short and nasty, but by God, it was short, and the economy recovered on its own volition. And it was only really when President Hoover started interfering, in sort of in 1930, followed by FDR, who followed exactly the same policies of intervention.
Right.
But sort of with his New Deal, if you like. I mean, that was a big bit of propaganda. I mean, you're talking about propaganda, and the result of that was, instead of a short, sharp shock and the whole thing sorting itself out quite quickly, the whole of the 1930s was really the most awful period, not only for America, but also for a lot of the rest of the world. I mean, my grandparents were farming in Kenya. We were growing coffee. We were growing oats. We had beef cattle. We had pyrethrum, which was a good crop. and coffee, and all, I mean, most of these crops, that the market value of them to the farmer, was just, almost below the cost of producing these things. You know,
Right.
um, it really screwed up the world agricultural scene big time, and it didn't help actually because in the sort of 1920s, the tractor came in, and the mechanization of farming actually meant that yields, particularly of grain, just rose so fantastically that prices weren't high going into the depression, but the depression just made it worse. So
Right.
yeah, you know, government should not intervene, but of course the Fed is going to intervene because as bond yields rise, I mean, we used to call it a buyer's strike. I mean, it's not a buyer's strike. That it rather implies that people get together and refuse to lend
Right.
money to the government. They don't.
Right.
They make up their own bloody minds. Um, it, as these bond yields rise, and as not only America but the UK and also the EU and Japan all get into this difficulty, um, I would be pretty certain that there will be a coordinated effort by the central banks to try and push rates down. But
Hmm.
it won't work. It'll just crash the fiat currencies.
It looks like they're already starting to talk that way with what Powell said yesterday. It's ridiculous.
Well,
I think he's locking horns with Trump, and it's like, and the
yeah,
the average person watching that would probably think that these guys can, they're both big and strong enough that they'll find a way to control it. And I'm saying this is a force of nature.
yeah,
They're
they
playing with
can't control
dynamite.
it. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Anyway, there we are. Are we
Okay,
recording?
well,
Are we
moving on to the
recording
next
this?
thing. Do you recall? This gets back to the elephant in the room. I have a very good memory. I can tell you things that happened in Moscow in the 1970s. And I do remember things that happened 5 years ago. So one
Yeah.
morning, I'm at a fellow war correspondent's house and we're making breakfast and the TV's on. And I watch a press conference where first Yellen and then Powell both say on camera that they have merged the Fed with the Treasury. Okay. Yes, they did do this. That's why I wanted to ask you, did you ever see this press conference? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
No, I didn't see it.
You can't find it now. The reason I brought it up the way I did is there's not a record of it, but I watched it with my own eyes,
No, I'm
and
not
I'm
aware
not
of it.
losing my mind.
But what I can say, Andrew, is that uh, they work hand in glove. I mean, they have to basically. So, for all practical purposes, they are merged, if you like, in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I was going with this because
Hmm.
the elephant in the room, so to speak, and I'll just go through this very quickly. I'm always looking at things that don't make sense, and I'll put them off to the side if I can't figure out exactly where they fit. I just keep them out there and think about them. So I'm trying to think how this all began. We're going to come back to Bitcoin and the other cryptos here in a minute because there's a bunch of new stuff on that, but it's all related. And there were certain things that didn't quite add up. So we'll go back to the Constitution. Article 1 says that only the federal government can mint coin. That can be
Yeah.
interpreted a bunch of different ways, but essentially, the federal government is the only entity that can do this. The
Yeah.
other was states have to accept silver and gold as a payment of debts. Okay, let's stick with the first part of this. So I'm just saying if, I am not saying that this is certainly not said in fact yet, but I believe this is what's happening. Um, if the Fed is creating a new CBDC, digital currency,
Hmm.
which I'm sure they hope will be conflated with the cryptos that everybody is already casual with. Um, if they're doing that, and then lately you see the thing with XRP. Well, XRP uses this ledger. I don't know if you've stayed with all of this. It's a bottomless well of nonsense. But the point being is the ledger of XRP allows a top-down configuration. It's not peer-to-peer. It's a controlling surveillance dystopian currency.
Yeah.
So they didn't talk about it for a while, and I think, and please tear this apart because I'm an amateur. I just want to hear your viewpoint on this. I think it will be underpinned with the SDR. And that opens up another bunch of stuff, but I'm not going to go there right now. The point being is under the CARES Act, it already does say that when they help people under COVID, supposedly, that's how all this went, and when they doubled the money supply, it said the money would be paid out from the Treasury. But if there were funds left over, it would be paid back to the Fed and the Treasury. And I think somehow with that loop, they're conflating things. They're merging things. Perhaps that's what they were referring to. I haven't been able to figure it out otherwise because nobody else has said it since. And I think when the words came out of their mouth, somebody probably authorized it and then within 20 seconds said, oh no, and then turned around and wanted that not part of the public record. The reason all this, you can see where I'm going, I'm sure. If the Fed and the Treasury are merged, then the Fed ostensibly can issue the money of the United States. And if it can do that, then it might be issuing CBDC, which they'll put a clever name on, like Fed Now, let's all get out there and go to the new currency. Then you've all of a sudden got everybody in CBDC. And I'll go one step further since I'm busy sharing my creativity with you. About 6 months ago, I was driving through a town in Arizona, and on the Burger King sign, it said, we now accept EBT. Well, I don't know if you understand this, but EBT is basically food stamps. So they're not supposed to accept them at any form of restaurant, but they do now. And then I started thinking that's how they're going to get it into public hands. Because what I think will happen, I'm going to keep going with this, but give me your full feedback because I'm actually unloading my latest sort of brainstorm from yesterday. There's a woman named Catherine Austin Fitts that used to be the Undersecretary of HUD, Urban Housing. Are you familiar with her?
Yeah. Vague.
Okay,
I mean, vague, yeah. Never met her, but I've certainly heard of her. Let's put it that way.
Well, yesterday she came out and said that she believes the reason Trump is pushing for Bitcoin to be a reserve asset is because the pressures from Wall Street, the people who are in Bitcoin want to get out with some profits and get out intact because right now the future doesn't look so bright. And what she believes is they're going to get it approved by the government. Then they're going to move everybody's retirement assets into Bitcoin. They'll cause a blow off top. These people will get out of there with bazillions of dollars. And then the average American will be brought to their knees and they won't be able to eat anymore. And at that point, yes, don't worry, we've got this all covered. We're sending EBT cards to everybody, and we've expanded it so that you can buy a television set at Walmart if you want to. And that's it. And that's how we all got on CBDC, and the rest is history. Our grandchildren are a number and not a name. What do you think of that?
Well, I think you should put it in a novel. No, I'll just try and sort of take apart the whole thing.
Yeah, please do.
I'll probably miss various elements of it. The first thing I think one's got to understand is that governments are wedded to fiat currencies. They want the ability to print currency. Right. And the way it works is quite simple. It comes off the Fed's balance sheet, and you have that you have a liability on one side and you have an asset on the other. Now, the liability is in the form of coin and notes, and and also bank reserves. The assets on the other side are typically government debt or agency debt or something like that, which they have. So that's the way it actually works from an accounting point of view. And right. An increase in the amount of currency or paper, if you like, in the economy, always has to be matched on the balance sheet by an increase in the assets. It can't work any other way.
Right.
The where the CBDC has caught everybody's imagination is that it would work in the same way as far as the central bank is concerned, but it would be issued by the central bank, not by a commercial bank. Now, it could be issued by the central bank through a commercial bank to members of the public, businesses, whatever. But the whole point of it, if you follow what the Bank of International Settlements, which have been running the sort of coordinating the information on all this,
Right.
What they've been saying is that this could be a useful tool for government to stimulate the parts of the economy which it believes need stimulating. Now, we've just had this conversation about, government should just not get involved with the economy. So
Right.
this is actually the next stage, if you like, in that sort of line of thinking.
Right. That's
But
frightening.
yeah, yes, it is frightening. But there's one aspect of this which I think is very, very important. I note that the commercial banks have hardly said a dicky bird on this. I mean, they've kept very, very quiet on the whole thing.
Right.
And I look at two things. Firstly, how long will it take for the Fed or a government department or whatever, sort of back test all the software and the whole thing. Bearing in mind, we're talking about having accounts with in the US, we're talking about a population of what 380 million or something, and we're talking
Uh-huh.
about businesses up and down the country and all the rest of it, and
Right.
all the monitoring procedures because this is also a means of keeping nasties out. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you can determine who they go to. That's the whole idea.
Right.
I mean, developing all the software and all the rest of it so it is absolutely bulletproof is going to take a long time. I don't know, 5 years minimum, I think.
A lot of this, to me, I mean, this is the reason I brought up World War II. I An awful lot of this smacks of the things that the Nazis were doing, and
Oh,
now it's
completely, yeah,
associated with us. It just
completely,
drives me nuts,
yeah,
And then, like, even just go back 20 years, because the way they've been doing all of this, you probably understand, is they created emergencies that weren't emergencies, and then they sidestepped the Constitution as if it were in our own best interest.
yeah,
Every time somebody now says, we're going to protect you, I'm like, what the
yeah,
heck are they going to do now? I don't want any
yeah,
more protection. I've had enough of this.
yeah.
And actually, I'm speaking to you from Mexico. I don't know what's going to happen inside the US, but I want to have a running start if I can't get out.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Anyway, let me continue on the
Oh, sure.
CBDC.
Sorry about that. Continue.
No, not at all. Um, I mean, there is one further point in this, and that is that unless this really does suit the commercial banks, and I can't see how it does, because it's wandering into their patch, if you like.
Right.
Bear in mind that everybody elected, Democrat and Republican, to Congress and all the rest of it in America is bankrolled by a bank.
Right.
And as one businessman said a long time ago, a good politician is one who's bought and stays bought. So I really don't see that these turkeys are going to vote for Christmas. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a practical hurdle in the whole thing.
Right.
You were also referring to currency actually issued by the Treasury rather than by the Fed. Now, as I understand it, there is a strict limit on that. So that doesn't actually get them very far.
Right.
I think the limit is something like 280 billion or something. I mean, it's a figure sort of like that, which it is chicken feed in these,
I'm confused.
in
No,
this environment.
walk me through this because this may be something I don't know about. Tell what are you saying exactly about the Treasury and how much they can create? What in reference to what?
Well, originally, I mean, I'm not an expert on this at all. The person actually who will tell you all about it is James Turk. I mean, he knows chapter verse the whole thing.
Okay.
But as I understand it, going back to your point, before the Fed existed, dollars were issued by the Treasury, by the
Right.
US Treasury.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Now, there was a strict limit on what they could do. And the limit, I think, was probably tied to gold reserves, whatever. I don't
Right.
know the mechanism, but
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
was that fixed thing. When the Fed came into existence and started issuing its own dollars, those dollars still existed. But
Okay.
they've sort of rather disappeared into the background, but they are distinct from a Fed dollar. That's the point. I
Right.
don't know the details and so on, but the history of it seems to me that that's the way in which you've got these sort of two currencies side by side,
Uh-huh.
and of course, because the Fed issue is now so enormous, and we're not just talking about sort of physical notes. We're also talking about bank reserves. So
Right.
we're in the trillions now. The original sort of treasury note was, is actually pretty small beer now.
Right.
So that's that bit. Now, as to the conspiracy theory over Bitcoin, I'm
I
going
had
to
to go
enjoy
there.
it. I'm going to
Yeah, I did.
enjoy it, Andrew. Right. Let's talk about Bitcoin. Bitcoin basically is a bubble. It's no more than that. It's got no legal status as money.
Right.
I mean, this idea that Trump has of promoting Bitcoin, I mean, quite honestly, as soon as he gets into government, he will be disabused of the notion. It's as simple as that.
Right.
Because why does the US government want control over money or over the currency? So it can issue it. It can't issue Bitcoin.
Right.
There's no point. And it's got no legal status in common law. And it's also got another hurdle, which is brought about by the blockchain, because the blockchain gives an identity to every Satoshi in existence.
Right.
And so you know whose property it is at any one
Right.
time.
Right.
Now, the problem is in common law, and this is the same pretty much worldwide, there is a distinction between money, which if it's stolen from you, you can only have recourse against the thief. And it's a criminal act. Okay, so that's fine.
Uh-huh.
If the thief, meanwhile, has spent the money on something else, then you've got no recourse against someone who received that without
Right.
knowing that it was stolen. So,
Right.
he goes into the local shop, spends it on sweeties or cigarettes or whatever, even though you've sort of put your little initial on on the dollar notes, tough. It's not yours anymore.
Right.
Now look at property which is specifically identifiable. And I'm not talking about banknote numbers. I'm talking about, Satoshis, whatever. They are arguably in the same category as, say, a painting on the wall. And if someone steals a valuable painting off your wall and it ends up being fenced and then goes into an auction house and then someone buys it without knowing, it's
Right.
still your property.
Right.
If you can establish that that was your property and it was stolen from you, you can get that back without
Right.
compensating the hapless buyer at all.
Right.
Bitcoin is in that second category. So in other words, there's a situation where if you own a Bitcoin or a Satoshi or many of those things, you could get a knock on the door from the feds who say, we know that you own this Bitcoin, whatever, because the blockchain says so. This, in the past, has been the proceeds of crime. You have to give it up because it's not yours. So in other words, you haven't got the certainty of ownership. You may have the certainty of possession in a wallet which is disconnected from any computer, but you don't have ownership. Now, this has yet to be tested in the courts, but I'm pretty sure that there is enough uncertainty over this aspect to completely disqualify any attempt to make Bitcoin money. So forget Bitcoin. This is a bubble. It's at the top of a credit bubble. And indeed, if you look at the Nasdaq and Bitcoin, they correlate beautifully.
Okay.
So in other words, it's the same cohort which owns the Magnificent Seven, which got the Bitcoin.
This is going to bring me into the next point. Okay, so as you were just pointing out, this also aligns with my point about Article 1 in the Constitution. Cryptos are not legal. They cannot be legal. They're illegal under the Constitution as money. So part of the reason I brought up XRP before is that it's been in court the last couple of years in federal court. They took a long time to make a decision, but they decided that it is in fact a cryptocurrency and not an investment vehicle. I would argue that every single one of the cryptos is an investment vehicle and that none of them are currency. This one's just a little bit different. Stick with me. It's another one of those. I wonder if that leads to that kind of things.
Except no. I think that's a different. This is a different issue because
Okay, go.
the whole point about an investment is it is a regulated thing, if you like.
Right.
So the decision as to whether XRP or whatever is an investment actually has got to be looked at in that context. Gold is not an investment. Commodities are not
Oh, you're
investments.
correct.
They're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
regulated. Yeah. Do you see what I
That's
mean?
yeah.
So when they're talking about an investment, they're talking about a regulated investment, and this basically is stocks. It's anything that you can put in a portfolio which is regulated, and this is one of the reasons actually why the investment management establishment are so slow on buying gold, because the compliance officers saying you can't do that. It's not a regulated investment.
Right.
So they go for ETFs, which are regulated because they're listed on an exchange.
Right. Unfortunately, they don't have the same counterparty lack of risk that regular gold
Exactly.
does.
Exactly.
So to finish this, as far as creating all of this, because I was following it right from the beginning when Bitcoin first came out, and then I kept studying the new ones that were coming out, which is why XRP stood out to me back then. It's going ballistic lately, but ever since I found out it was a top-down configuration, I had a feeling there was something that was going to happen with that, and I think it will be attached to one of these authorized bank-run cryptos of some sort, not a crypto, but a CBDC. At any rate, when they first did it, now looking back on it, do you think that maybe or at least there were different reasons for it, but do you think that it was used to slow the velocity of money when they were printing such an outlandish amount of it? And then knowing that if people bought into this thing that was called a currency, but was actually an investment vehicle, that it would just sit there. So they knew that they could put a lot of money into these things and have it not go round and round in velocity. What do you think?
No, I don't buy that, Andrew. I don't.
Okay.
I don't think so at all. I mean, apart from anything else, I don't really see the relevance, if you like, of that relationship.
Okay.
The second thing is that you're assuming these guys are very, very clever, and I think you might be falling down on that one.
I think they're using AI.
They say so. No,
I don't think they're the smartest guys.
I mean, I tell you one thing which is interesting. This sort of production of Tether and all these sort of dollar substitutes, as it were. Of course, they have to back it with the dollar so that it's 1-to-1. So what do they do? They rush out and it works now. It wasn't so good a little while ago, but they can go and buy T-bills.
Right.
So it's actually a lovely little operation as a bank, because you can do is you can issue, because again, look at the balance sheet. Okay, this way you become a bank of deposit, not a bank which lends money into existence. What you do is you create your own currency into existence, which is on your balance sheet. Okay, so that you have depositors who think that they've got this Tether, whatever it might be. And on the other side, you go out and you buy US T-bills, which yield you 5% or 4.5% or whatever the rate is.
Right.
So you just print them out both ways like that, and you pick up 4.5% here, 0 there. There's my turn, 4.5%. Lovely. And the amount of capital that I have to put up, I mean, particularly if I run it from somewhere like the Bahamas, is not much.
Right. So, okay, so
what's the operation? But of course, from the government's point of view, you could say that this is, if you like, sort of off the balance sheet money printing. Or funding of the debt, because I mean, so what's the T-bill? What is the T-bill? Basically, it's an obligation on one side and it's the currency on the other. So this is a way in which government finances its deficit. And if you've got these guys, doing banks of deposit and picking up the difference between the 4.5% and zero, which is the balance which is being used to go and buy Bitcoin or whatever it is.
Right.
I mean, what's not to like? But I think this is probably a slightly marginal argument rather than a mainstream argument, if you like.
Yeah. So, just in closing, what do you, in the near term, what do you expect to have happen? And when this does start to play out, what are you expecting?
Well, I think basically, bear in mind that this is the biggest bubble in history. I mean,
Yeah.
of that, there is no doubt.
Right.
It is far larger than we had at the time of the dot-com bubble. Not only that, but the valuation disparity between equities and bonds is twice as great as it was at the time of the dot-com bubble, which means that equities are extremely vulnerable. We're now seeing bond yields rise. They will continue to rise, and that will destabilize the stock market. It will also lead to higher interest rates for mortgages, for other forms of financing, and so on and so forth. So what we're looking at is the bubble being imploded by rising interest rates. And depending how the Fed plays it out, I think it's almost certain that the Fed will sacrifice the dollar in terms of its purchasing power rather than sacrifice the entire US economy.
Okay.
In the sense of raising interest rates, bankrupting everybody, asset valuations, which of course is the collateral for the banking system as well,
Right.
going down the pan and so on. And I mean, you've got walking wounded with the commercial real estate side.
Right.
It would be the final death knell for that. Mortgages, bad news. What does that do to house prices, etc.? I mean, you can see that it'll collapse
Yeah.
everything.
Right. Did you see that as a hyperinflationary collapse at the end?
Well, if in effect that's the way it works out, but
Yeah.
the way I would describe it, in a way which is easier to understand, is that the Fed, by being very, very reticent to raise interest rates, will basically weaken the dollar. So the dollar's purchasing power will go down. It will find that prices are rising, even though the economy is going deeper and deeper into a slump.
Right.
And therefore, it's hoist by its own petard, as they say. The Fed does have this. Sorry.
What timeline do you see as far as all of this
Well,
taking place?
I think it's starting now. And such is the severity of this bubble that I think when it collapses, it'll collapse with some velocity. So I'm penciling in next year, 2025.
Did you think we have a few months left? What do you think? I'm going to press you on that one because I have a lot of stuff I need to take care of before this happens.
Well, I tell you what, just get the hell out of credit because you'll kick yourself if you find it's too late. That's really, really my view.
Well, how do you see real estate playing out in the midst of all of this? Like a lot of people think, well, the prices will keep going up, and they might. But if the value of the dollar goes down at a greater rate, the real estate loses value. And I keep thinking about, again, what happened in Germany at the end of the Weimar years. You could buy the nicest house in Berlin for 5 ounces of gold.
Absolutely.
Are we going there?
Yeah, no, you're dead right. That's, whenever anyone asks me the question you've just asked, I repeat something which was in a book by Stefan Zweig, the Austrian author who lived through those times. And he said that, and we're talking about late 1923. He said that you could buy a 6-bedroom house in a swanky part of Berlin for $100. $100, remember, at 20.67 to the ounce was slightly less than 5 ounces of gold.
Right.
And that's what happens. I mean, I don't know how many zillions of paper marks, the transaction was valued at. But in gold, I mean, it's quite simple. You're getting it for virtually nothing.
Wow, it's kind of amazing to me that we're living through this right now. This is, I could 20 years ago I could not have predicted. I mean, I think I knew deep down this was going to happen, but everything was on autopilot. It felt like Huh, maybe for once in human history, we're going to slide through and not have some horrific event. But
yeah,
now looking at this, I don't know. I just don't see a way out of it. And the same people, the people that are running it, are they're not responsible. I mean,
no,
they don't handle their responsibility properly.
no,
You know.
no.
So
I know it's and of course, I mean, the thing about a bubble is that the vast majority of people don't realize they're in it. You know,
right,
they think it's easy to make money. You know, just go out and
right,
buy stocks. Um,
right,
and it's been so institutionalized as well. And by that I mean that ordinary people go along to a financial advisor who
right,
doesn't know anything about anything. Let's face it.
right,
And he's just been educated because he has to pass exams. You know,
right,
to sort of you got low risk, medium risk, high risk, and you know that's sort of bond to equity, whatever. And
right,
does he go and buy stocks? No, he goes and buys mutual funds. And of course, it sanitizes the whole thing because if I
right,
buy a mutual fund, there's no risk. You know,
right,
one company goes bust in it, I don't have a problem. You know, it's not
right,
going to affect the fund.
right,
But there are things called bear markets,
right.
and it doesn't cut much ice for a financial advisor when he turns around and says to one of his customers who's complained about the amount of he's lost. You know, he will say, "Well, you know, the market's down 30%, but your investments are only down 20%. I think I've done very well."
Right. That's awesome. You got to love that. Hey, one last question for you before I let you go. I keep extending this, but are you familiar with, again, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, and I'm still out on what I think of all this. The World Economic Forum and the different things that they've put out there. One of them is 15-minute cities. And I looked at yesterday when I was looking at the commercial real estate debacle. It dawned on me that's what they'll do with it. They're going to turn all of these office buildings into 15-minute cities. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think the World Economic Forum, I think, is a joke. It really is. I mean, it's run by Klaus Schwab, who
Right,
basically fancies himself as a latter-day Marx. You know, I'm going to run the world. I rule the world.
right,
Um, but he's been very clever insofar as he's got this formula. You know, Davos. You know, glamour. Da 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 da. We can charge a lot
right,
of people, a lot for attendees, and of course, if you're anyone, you've got to be there. You know, he's managed to get that formula worked out extremely well.
right,
Um, but what it's done is, the stuff that's come out of it, like statements from one of I think it was a Danish MP who said something like, you will own nothing and be happy. You know, this
right.
sort of stuff has sort
Right,
of alerted everybody to hold on. You know, this is not good. And of course, he's had the Young Leaders Program, so Trudeau is in there and all the rest of it. I mean, Trudeau's a total idiot. Let's face it. So
yes,
so you
agreed.
can see how the idiot brigade get in there because they have this sense of belonging, the sense of magnifying their power, all that sort of stuff.
Right,
It appeals, if you like, to the lower instincts of many politicians.
right,
Um, but and most of the attendees who go there don't actually go there because they think Klaus Schwab is going to be running the world and I would rather be on his side. They go there because they meet all the other people and they can network and all this sort of stuff.
right,
It's exactly the same rubbish that you get with a G20, with the finance ministers meeting first and then, they
right.
all feel absolutely wonderful. I'm a very important person, and group photos and all the rest of it. And I'm standing next to Donald Trump, or
Yeah,
you know what? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's a joke. It's not actually going anywhere,
Mhm.
and I think we just pay too much attention to it. We're
Okay,
not going to stop. We're not going to stop this sort of nonsense.
right,
But basically, the whole of this financial system faces collapse. I would worry far more about what replaces the current political setup. That I think is very, very concerning. And here
yeah,
we get Hayek's The Road to Serfdom.
Mhm.
You have the collapse, and then everybody starts shouting for leadership. And what do? You get another Hitler. So the
Right.
idea that the lesson learned in this is do not go down the fiat currency road. Make sure that your currency is a proper gold substitute with a proper gold standard.
Right here is as good a time as any to introduce my father. I've followed his advice on matters like this for years.
I was arrested for what they called spying. The fact of the matter is, as I said, I was an overt collector of military intelligence.
That's an intercontinental ballistic missile.
Among other things, my father monitored gold flows into and out of the Soviet Union. He said the people suffered tremendously not having a gold-backed currency.
And people said, well, the Soviet Union wasn't as bad as it appeared. Well, believe me, it was worse. And I think anybody who lived there for any period of time could appreciate it and became very jaded and sarcastic about the whole situation. There was a great shortage of vehicles in the Soviet Union, and getting around was not easy. They still have a lot of horse and buggies there. Their cars, the Moskvich and the Volga, were relics when I was there. I was there in the late 60s, 68, 69, and 70. They had taken all their ideas from a 1951 Chevrolet. On many of the roads, they were horse-drawn sleds, and they actually worked with them and worked very extensively with them. This is food distribution, Soviet style. These are potatoes. They just brought a whole truckload of them, dropped them on the sidewalk, and then they went about selling them from there. They do the heavy work, too. You can see the shovels and so forth. They got an awful lot of the work was done by women. That's an equal opportunity country they have over there. And but they did hard, heavy work.
We're going to go through, I think, an awful lot of difficulties. And
Right.
remember, too, that in a democracy, with the people who will absolutely be put into starvation by the collapse in the currency, they're going to have to vote for someone.
Right.
They will elect what follows, and they will be angry. They will have been, they will have lost relatives, elderly relatives who can't just get the pills, because they're not available anymore. I mean,
Right.
this is such a catastrophe,
It is.
the collapse of credit, this super bubble,
Mm-hmm.
all caused by government policy or by central bank policy at the behest of governments.
Mm-hmm.
But, when it comes to coming up with a decent, this idea of a phoenix rising from the ashes, and we're going to get a new paradigm, a new world and all the rest of it. I mean, forget it. It's going to be very, very tough. It really is. One good bit of news, in a funny way, is that Russia and China, I believe, have accumulated enough gold to protect their own currencies from a collapse in the West.
Right.
So you've got, you've got the whole of Asia and, the extension through BRICS and all the rest of it, which in a sense has a degree of isolation from these problems. And they will, I think they'll go on to gold standards as a means of protecting their own currencies. Russia could do it tomorrow, but she's not doing it until she's really forced into that position. Because she's winning the war in the Ukraine, apart from anything else. I mean, she's beating the Americans and the NATO hands down. So she doesn't need to do this, really. But that, I think, is probably our salvation. So when you're looking at investments, regulated investments, rather than unregulated Bitcoin or whatever, the mining sector could be an outlet because, the demand is going to continue from the majority of the world's population, who I believe will be rapidly industrializing over the next 100 years.
Yeah.
That's our salvation. But of course, our stupid politicians are just cutting us off from it completely.
Right. I said I wouldn't have one more question, but as we talk, they keep coming up. I've in the back of my head felt that we never get the whole story. I was thinking that because of the way COVID played out, and neither China nor the U.S. accused the other of an act of war, then in back rooms, I'm thinking they are probably all in on the same plan for which type of digital currency, or initially which type of crypto that they select. Do you think there is some backroom deal possibly between Russia and China, or China and the U.S. regarding going forward with whatever the reserve currency will be?
No,
Okay.
no, no
No, I
deal at
just had
all.
to ask because it just doesn't
Yeah.
quite add up to me.
No, it
But
doesn't.
yeah,
It doesn't add up. I mean, I haven't heard too many conspiracy theories in that direction, but it doesn't add up at all. I mean,
you know what? This thing is, people get too much grief for asking questions. I'm not married to these ideas. They just come to mind, and I
yeah,
just
yeah,
want to look at them to see if there's
yeah.
something to them. You
Well,
know?
why not? I mean,
Yeah,
it's right to ask them, because these are subjects which have to be explored.
they
That
do.
is
They do.
absolutely for sure. Yeah. Um,
Well, thanks so
but
much again. I can't even tell you. I hope you'll come back on. I've got so much more I'd like to talk with you about.
yeah, I'd be very happy to. I'd be very happy to, Andrew.
Well, thanks so much, Alistair. We'll catch up in the future.
Yeah, very much my pleasure.
The spy game, don't get caught. And if you get caught, deny it.